is founded upon the struggle for equality, human dignity, and freedom, a struggle our people relentlessly fought for, and a struggle for which the great Nelson Mandela was prepared to die. The prepared to die speech that is now universally known. Fundamental human rights have been at the core of what we hoped for as a nation. And they are the firm foundation upon which our constitutional democracy was built. So as we celebrate 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and 30 years of democracy in South Africa, I'm honored to stand before you today to reflect on our journey as a nation and how human rights have enabled the advancement of a constitutional democracy in South Africa. Our journey to constitutionalism in the democratic South Africa dates as far back as the implementation of the apartheid law itself, 1948, which forcefully segregated the indigenous people of South Africa and infringed upon their fundamental rights. In the Nelson Mandela famous "I am prepared to die" speech, which was delivered at the Rivonia trial of 1964, I quote, "During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It's an ideal for which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Now that is by way of a background to what I intend to traverse. Now you will have heard, or you will have noted from the introductions about who I am, that I've had the privilege of sitting as an appointed commissioner in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in several hearings of that body. For the most part, most of the hearings dealt with gross violations of human rights, killings, abductions, torture, and severe ill treatment. Most of these evil deeds were perpetrated during the apartheid era by state agencies such as the army, the police, the Secret Service, and their surrogates. The murders and the tortures, the maimings and the disappearances, all at the hands of these agencies, are now a matter of public record. To be sure, there were human rights violations of that kind also by members of the liberation movement, the NC's MK and the PAC's APLA, and by individuals in those formations. But by and large, however, it is fair to say that in 9 out of 10 cases of gross violations of human rights, and in the TRC we defined what we meant by gross violations of human rights: killings, abductions, torture, severe ill treatment. Or, as I said, our investigations in the TRC revealed that the perpetrators were apartheid-era state security personnel. There is now hardly any argument about that. Even though our claims that this was so were met at the time with cynicism, incredulity, and in some cases derision. I think with the then appearance of the former Minister of Law and Order, Mr. Adrian Flock, together with the top brass of the former South African police, on charges of the attempted murder of the Reverend Frank Chikane, for instance, silenced even the most cynical detractors of the Truth Commission's claims that the previous order was rotten from the top. Murder and mayhem being executed against freedom fighters by even state ministers, even as they professed law and order during the day, but spread death and destruction by night. All of these excesses of the apartheid era are much more known, much more commonplace, much more treated nowadays with disdainful contempt by everyone, even those that knew that these excesses were taking place, but they did nothing to prevent them or to protest their occurrence. There is, however, another level at which the apartheid era posed itself out in society. That was the most subtle level of victimization. One that did not necessarily express itself in terms of tears, blood, and guts. It was a level at which the system produced beneficiaries and victims. A system in terms whereof the beneficiaries were for the most part white, and the victims were for the most part black people of South Africa. The racist laws of the colonial and apartheid past so ordered South African society that all the productive means of exchange and production, land, mines, as one of the speakers indicated, land, mines, money, skills, intellectual and creative opportunities were the sole preserve of the white population at the expense of the black citizens who were not trained properly or not trained at all in anything and in any field of endeavor. Black people who were dispossessed of their land and property and their livestock systematically and methodically, who were stripped of their citizenship in the land of their birth, who were declared sojourners in the urban areas without any rights to residence and permanency, who were excluded from the best educational institutions of higher learning, from whom for years, as a matter of deliberate policy, skills in accountancy, commercial and corporate law, engineering, architecture, skills development were held to be too complicated to be understood by black people, and were therefore deliberately excluded from the curricula of institutions specially created for black people. This deliberate policy of creating white beneficiaries and black victims of this systematic and systemic disempowerment created a yawning gap between the black and the white people of South Africa. It created an impression that white people are necessarily superior because nature made them so. Echoes of the Israeli-Palestinian struggle of today, and black people were inferior for the same reason. Because this disparity was there for everyone to see, most white people began to believe it to be a God-ordained truth. Regrettably, it has been allowed to become a culture for the deliberate perpetration of inequalities in South Africa. Most white people, particularly in the business community, have continued to take a view of themselves as having done nothing wrong, as having worked very hard for who they have, for what they have, as owing no apology to anyone for their achievements, and as being victims of reverse racism when attempts are being made to empower black people in ways sometimes that clearly advance black people by discriminating against white people. Very few white people, even in our democracy, are quite ready to accept that whether in the apartheid era they were liberals or Crumpters, progressive or reactionary, all of them by reason only of being white were beneficiaries of what apartheid society disproportionately bestowed upon them. In the TRC, therefore, we called the business community to come and testify before the commission in an endeavor to assess the extent to which the business community was in fact part of the problem of apartheid rather than being part of the attempts to dismember the monstrous regime and destroy it forever. Most businesses' position of privilege was far too cozy for them to upset the upper caste. We find, and these findings are now a matter of public record in volume 6 of the TRC report, that business, mainly white, generally benefited financially and materially from apartheid policy in one or more of the following ways, and the list is not even exhaustive. White-owned large-scale agricultural farming and agribusiness enterprises benefited from the colonial era restrictions on black land ownership that were maintained during apartheid and the extremely low wages such enterprises paid to the landless. 2, mining companies benefited from the provision of a relatively cheap migratory labor force brought into being by land expropriation, forced removals, apartheid pass laws, and influx controls. 3, the armaments industry